All right, let's rip into this.
Okay.
We're tackling something pretty fundamental today. How to build genuinely peak-performing teams.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And we're drawing some, well, surprising insights from a source called Rediscovering God's Plan for Peak-Performing Mission Teams. Our source material for this deep dive is absolutely packed. We're talking discussion questions, exercises, practical stuff
Right.
that are going to challenge, I think, a lot of what we assume about how teams work.
It definitely pushes back on some common ideas.
So our mission today, then, is to, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights.
Kind of a shortcut.
Exactly, offering you a real shortcut to understanding not just, okay, how do we build these teams, but how do we sustain them, make them truly effective?
It's that sustainability piece that's often missing.
Totally. It's about turning potential into real performance, and I promise you, it's full of stuff that'll make you go, huh.
Yeah. What's truly fascinating, right from the start, is how this material just hits you with these really provocative questions.
Like what?
Well, for example, it asks, what if the Western Church's emphasis on individual calling? What if that's actually undermined the power of the gospel in global missions?
Wow. Okay. That's a heavy question right off the bat.
It is. It's not just hypothetical. It's really an implied critique. The core insight, I think, is that if team-based mission is the biblical norm, which the source argues pretty strongly it is,
right,
then our tendency, our default to solo efforts, that might be a huge blind spot.
A blind spot we don't even realize we have. And that's just the starting point.
Just the beginning.
We're going to explore everything from, okay, why do teams so often fracture? How do we measure success in a way that actually means something?
Beyond just numbers sometimes.
Yeah. And even how to turn conflict, something we usually avoid, into a pathway to health.
That's a big one.
It's really a journey into the DNA, the very core of high-impact teams. And, well, you're invited along for the ride. 1, the foundational idea, why teams? So let's start where the source does, right at the beginning.
The foundation.
Yeah. With this foundational idea that, frankly, challenges a really common mindset. It suggests team-based mission isn't just, a good idea or practical.
Not just strategy.
Right. But potentially a biblical norm. It really makes you question assumptions about individual calling.
Exactly. And the material, it pushes us to look at Scripture, to reflect on passages like, say, Acts 13 or Mark 6.
Okay.
And it suggests these aren't just like isolated stories. They reveal foundational insights into the nature and, crucially, the necessity of teamwork in God's mission.
Necessity, not just preference.
That's the insight. Collaboration isn't just efficient. It's scripturally inherent. It's part of the design.
Wow. So for you listening right now, maybe take a second. Consider, how has your own cultural background, your upbringing, how has that shaped your assumptions about leadership?
Or autonomy.
Autonomy, collaboration, all of that within a team.
Because those unexamined assumptions, they can really trip you up later on.
Absolutely. They're often the hidden rocks, too. Understanding why teams fail and building their DNA, okay, that's a powerful foundation. But, once we get the why of teams, the sources don't shy away from the tough stuff. They pivot immediately to, okay, why do teams so often fail? Fall apart.
Yeah, the hard reality.
So what are those hidden expectations we drag into team life? The things that might have sabotaged partnerships before?
Well, the material highlights a few things. Often it's unrealistic expectations, right?
Yes.
Or just a lack of genuine direct communication, honest talk.
Yeah.
And it makes this really interesting point. It suggests that sometimes chasing peace at all costs, that might actually prevent the hard conversations, the necessary ones that lead to genuine team health.
Wait, so trying too hard to keep the peace can actually be bad for the team?
That's what it argues. It can stop you from dealing with the real issues.
That's counterintuitive for a lot of leaders, I bet.
It is. So when teams do fracture, the source challenges us.
Right.
Okay, what's the root cause? Is it a failure of vision, structure, or something deeper? A failure of, soul. Discerning that is key.
Wow. Okay, so this leads us right into the next bit. The DNA of effective teams.
Building that core.
The sources really push us here, they ask. Do you treat teamwork as just a clever tactic, a means to an end?
No.
Or is it a theological commitment, something grounded in God's very nature?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it? And it ties directly into how teams develop.
How so?
Well, the material brings up the forming, storming, norming, performing spectrum.
Tuckman's model.
Classic.
Yeah, that classic model. And it asks, where does your current team actually sit on that spectrum?
Okay.
And the key insight is that effective leadership means adapting your style. You lead a forming team differently than a performing one.
Right. You can't use the same approach for every stage. Exactly. And it reframes the whole thing. Team dynamics aren't just a logistical hurdle you have to get over. They're a discipleship opportunity, a chance for growth. 3, transforming conflict into health.
Okay, now here's where, for me, it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The sources pose this profound what-if question. And honestly, it turns a lot of our usual thinking upside down.
Go on.
What if conflict? What if it isn't a disruption to be avoided at all costs?
Yeah.
What if it's actually an invitation to deeper sanctification, maybe even greater spiritual authority?
Exactly. That's the radical reframing the source offers. Yeah. Conflict isn't just something to manage or sidestep. It's potentially a divinely appointed crucible, a place for real personal and team growth.
Wow.
The insight is, by engaging conflict biblically, teams can actually mature spiritually. They can unlock new levels of authority in their mission.
Moving beyond just surface niceness.
Precisely. Beyond surface peace to genuine and robust health. And it makes us look at our own default responses, right?
Yeah, like, do I avoid it? Do I get aggressive?
Or just appease, cave in. And how do those defaults shape the whole team culture?
So no more running and hiding when things get spicy.
Right. And the source points us towards biblical principles.
Yeah.
Specifically mentions Matthew 18, Philippians 2
Okay.
as guides for a more redemptive approach.
Yeah.
Not just winning an argument, but restoring relationship.
And there are practical steps, too.
Yeah, one powerful suggestion is facilitating a peacemaking covenant session, a structured way to surface issues and actually resolve them.
That sounds intense, but necessary. You mentioned earlier how unresolved conflict affects credibility.
Absolutely. The source points this out clearly.
How does that play out?
Well, think about it. If a team's full of internal friction, even if they try to hide it, it leaks out.
In what ways?
Maybe inconsistent messaging, a lack of, joyful unity that people can see, sometimes just basic disorganization.
Right.
So if the community you're trying to reach sees a team that's divided or struggling internally,
It undermines the message.
Totally. It raises questions about the authenticity of their mission, their faith. It's not just an internal team problem. It has real external consequences for your impact. 4, cultivating unity and performance.
Okay, so it's not just about feeling good inside the team bubble. It affects the mission itself.
Directly.
Which connects perfectly to building that shared culture, right? How do teams really norm for unity, as the source puts it, in a way that actually sticks?
Well, the sources really emphasize the power of shared rituals and spiritual rhythms.
Okay, like what kind of things?
Could be anything from how you start meetings to regular prayer times together to celebrating milestones. These act as anchors for the team's identity and unity.
So it's intentional.
Exactly. The insight is that real team norms aren't just reactive, things that happen by accident. They need to be intentionally discipled.
Discipled norms, I like that.
Yeah. It challenges us. If someone joined your team today, could they clearly figure out and say, okay, this is what kind of people we are?
That's a good test.
And the practical steps, things like actually codifying specific rhythms, weekly, monthly, quarterly.
Writing it down.
Yeah, maybe even documenting a team culture code that you review together, say twice a year. It's about proactive cultural shaping, not just letting it drift.
Okay, that makes sense. Which leads us to the ultimate goal, right? Performing with focus. Because let's be honest, you can build a really healthy, happy team.
Everyone gets along great.
But is it possible to kind of idolize that internal harmony? To focus so much on feeling good together that you forget the actual mission?
That's precisely the tension the material tackles. It's a real danger.
So how do we avoid that?
It challenges us to think hard about metrics. What truly matters when we talk about team performance in a, quote, kingdom context.
Right. Not just corporate KPIs, maybe.
Exactly. It pushes beyond just activity levels. It asks, what would Jesus celebrate? And maybe more pointedly, what would he prune if he looked at your team's fruitfulness?
Pruning. That's direct.
It is. The core insight is aligning your key performance indicators, your KPIs, with what the source calls gospel fruit.
Meaning?
Things like disciples actually being made, churches being launched, real transformation happening, and then reviewing those specific metrics regularly, maybe quarterly, to ensure you're having a genuine impact, not just staying busy. 5, strategic leadership, and team composition.
That focus on actual fruitfulness, on impact, is key. And it really brings us around to leadership, doesn't it? How we guide these teams.
Absolutely central.
The source doesn't mess around here either. It asks point blank, are you leading like a shepherd? Or are you, maybe unintentionally, smothering like a control freak?
Yeah, it prompts some pretty vital self-reflection for anyone in leadership.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it talks about apostolic leadership.
Yeah.
And it defines that not really as a title, but as a posture.
A posture.
Yeah, a way of leading that embraces team dynamics as a discipleship opportunity, like we talked about earlier. The insight is that often it's our own fear or insecurity as leaders that prevents us from truly releasing authority, from creating what it calls a permission-giving culture.
Where people feel empowered to act.
Exactly, where initiative isn't squashed. And a really practical suggestion it makes is to do a 360 feedback review.
Get input from all around.
Yep, on your leadership posture to identify those blind spots we all have, and then actually draft a leadership adjustment plan to move towards genuine servant leadership.
That takes humility.
Huge humility.
So, okay, you're working on leading with that shepherd's heart. Then comes the crucial next step, who's actually on the team selection.
Getting the right people on the bus.
And the source puts it pretty starkly. Would Jesus recruit your current team based on your criteria? Or would he challenge how you're choosing people?
Ouch. Yeah, this is where the rubber really meets the road.
So what's the alternative to just grabbing who's available or who we like?
The material proposes what it calls a 3 C's filter.
3 C's.
Calling, character, and contribution. Those are the key criteria, rather than just relying on availability or, affinity people who are just like us.
Calling, character, contribution. Got it.
And it also brings in the APIST gifting framework from Ephesians 4.
Right. Apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher.
Exactly. But viewing them not just as titles, but as describing specific spiritual functions needed for a well-rounded team.
Functional diversity.
That's the goal. To assess the team's functional diversity and avoid unintentionally building a team of clones of yourself.
A team of me's. Yeah, that limits things.
Hugely. Instead, you seek a spirit-led, functionally diverse body where maybe those less flashy or undervalued ministry gifts aren't sidelined, weakening the whole team.
That's so important, honoring all the gifts. Okay, one last thing on leadership. The source asks, can your leadership handle ambiguity?
Ambiguity. The gray areas.
Yeah. Or does it automatically default to positional control when things get uncertain?
This really highlights the need for organic and accountable leadership. Meaning recognizing people who have influence, even without a formal title. Those natural leaders.
Okay.
And learning to navigate that tension between empowering grassroots initiative, letting people run with ideas, while still ensuring alignment with the overall vision.
That's a tricky balance.
It is. It's about growing in functional authority influence based on competence and character, not just relying on your job title. And often, that functional authority is way more powerful. 6, clarity, communication, and formalizing expectations.
Okay, let's shift to getting really practical about how the team actually operates day to day.
Effectiveness.
The nuts and bolts. Yeah. And the source points out something many of us probably feel, is ambiguity slowly draining your team's energy and effectiveness.
Such a common trap, isn't it?
Yeah,
that lack of clarity.
Slowly.
And the source makes a pretty strong claim here. Yes, ambiguity is a silent killer of team effectiveness.
Wow, a silent killer.
It really raises that crucial question about purpose, about the shared vision. What happens when a team loses sight of its why? And maybe more practically, how long would it take before you even noticed you'd lost it?
That's a scary thought.
It is. So the material encourages things like, can you articulate your team's vision in one clear sentence?
The elevator pitch for your team.
Kind of. And ensuring that shared purpose isn't just assumed, but it's actually lived out, talked about.
And for roles, who does what?
For role clarity, it suggests using something like a RACI chart.
RACI.
Yeah. Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. It clarifies who does what for specific tasks.
Ah, okay.
And it reframes accountability. It's not something to dread or avoid. It's actually a gift that helps everyone succeed.
Accountability is a gift. I like that framing. Super practical. Okay, what about communication? Another area where teams can get tangled.
Definitely.
The sources ask, are your team's communication patterns actually cultivating clarity? Or are they just adding to the confusion?
And what's fascinating here is that it focuses not just on what you communicate, but the how, the unspoken habits.
Like tone.
Tone, timing, which tools you use for what, all those little things shape the culture, for better or worse.
So true.
The material suggests actually auditing your communication channels. Which ones are redundant, which ones are just confusing,
But communication audit, okay.
and maybe even building a team communication covenant.
What's that?
Basically, an agreement defining the purpose, the expected timing, the right method for each type of communication, so everyone's on the same page.
Like, when do we use email versus chat versus a meeting?
Exactly, and balancing that real-time synchronous stuff with the more flexible asynchronous communication, getting that mix right.
Okay, this section closes with a really provocative thought. I mean, really makes you think.
Hit me with it.
What if a signed document could prevent a spiritual crisis? Would you invest the time to write one?
Wow. Okay, that's a big claim.
Yeah.
A signed document preventing a crisis.
Yeah. What's the thinking there?
The core idea is about formalizing expectations, using tools like maybe a vision and strategy paper of ESP, or a memo of understanding an MOU, especially between different partners or team members.
So getting things down on paper.
Right. And the insight is, these documents aren't just boring bureaucracy. They actively reinforce unity. They align expectations.
How does that prevent a crisis?
By helping prevent mission drift, where you slowly get off course.
Yeah.
And by reducing the relational strain that comes from vague, unspoken, or unmet expectations. They're like preventative medicine for the team's spiritual health. 7, decision-making, spiritual vitality, and team growth.
Preventative medicine, I like that. So it's about preventing issues before they even start.
Exactly.
Proactive.
Okay, let's talk decisions. Another potential friction point. The sources ask, when was the last time your team's decision-making process actually strengthened trust rather than, causing tension?
That's a high bar. Strengthening trust through decisions.
Yeah. So how do we do that?
Well, the material looks at different models, right? You've got consensus, where everyone agrees. You've got delegated decisions. You've got leader decided.
And it prompts us to think, which model does our team default to? And maybe more importantly, does that default build trust or create tension?
Good question.
The key insight seems to be that transparent processes, where it's clear how a decision will be made and why it was made that way, those build trust.
Transparency is key.
And balancing that discernment piece with delegation, with clear authority, it even suggests keeping a transparent decision log so everyone can see what was decided and why.
Okay, that's super practical. Now, shifting gears a bit, to the very heart, the engine of the team. Is your team spiritually alive? Or is it just, operationally efficient, running smoothly, but maybe empty?
Yeah, this gets to the core vitality, doesn't it?
Totally.
And it raises this crucial question about spiritual life together. The sources really emphasize practices that help the team hear from God as a team, not just as individuals praying alone.
Hearing God together.
How?
The insight is that shared spiritual rhythms, things like worship together, maybe times of confession, corporate intercession, these are vital.
They fight against that spiritual drift that happens so easily when busyness just overwhelms intimacy with Jesus. It's easy to get focused on the tasks. And it suggests practical things like scheduling regular, maybe biannual spiritual retreats just to intentionally nurture that collective connection with God.
Taking time out to reconnect. Makes sense. Okay, looking towards the future now, the sources ask a really forward-thinking question, I thought.
What's that?
Are you building a team that grows or just a team that lasts?
Ooh, grows versus lasts. What's the distinction there?
Well, it ties into this idea of designing teams that multiply.
Okay, multiplication.
Yeah, it challenges our assumptions about could be. The ultimate goal, the sources suggest, and this is powerful, is that maybe the greatest thing your team ever does is not what it accomplishes, but who it reproduces.
Well, reproducing leaders.
Exactly. Highlighting the profound importance of raising up leaders for new teams, not just maintaining the status quo in your current one. It's about kingdom expansion. 8, feedback, adaptation, and sustaining excellence. That focus on reproduction, on multiplication, that's huge. Okay, let's tackle an area that, let's be honest, many teams really struggle with. Feedback.
The F word for some teams.
Right. Is it a normal, healthy rhythm on your team? Or is it like this dreaded once-a-year event that everyone braces for?
Yeah, the source really pushes for cultivating a culture of feedback.
A culture, not just an event.
Exactly, where feedback actually strengthens relationships instead of feeling threatening.
How do you build that culture?
The key insight is that ongoing intentional feedback builds trust and capacity over time. It's not about gotcha moments.
So, practically,
it encourages initiating both that real-time, in-the-moment feedback and more structured quarterly reviews.
And that at the end.
Yeah. And even investing in training peer evaluators, teaching people how to give and receive feedback healthfully, and using tools like 360-degree feedback, especially for leadership.
Making it normal, making it helpful. Okay, next step, adapting. The world changes constantly, right?
Always.
So the sources ask, are your team systems built for yesterday's simplicity? Or are they ready for today's complexity and tomorrow's surprises?
Yeah, this is about building adaptive capacity, the ability to flex and change.
How do teams do that?
The insight is that proactivity is crucial. You can't just wait for change to hit you. You need to anticipate and prepare.
So less reacting, more preparing.
Right. It suggests practices like maybe running a rapid adaptation simulation.
A simulation,
Yeah.
like a fire drill for change.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Using unpredictable scenarios to practice responding. And identifying your team's agility gaps where you're weak.
Yeah.
And then strengthening those areas, maybe through cross-training or more scenario planning.
Intentionally designing for resilience. I like that.
Exactly.
Okay, finally wrapping it all up. It's about sustaining this, right? Sustaining a culture of excellence for the long haul.
Keeping it going.
What rituals, what practices, what values will keep your team healthy and effective amidst all the inevitable stuff? Growth, pressure, transitions.
Yeah, this final outcome ties it all together. It involves measuring excellence, but in a way that reflects both those kingdom values we talked about and the mission results.
Values and results.
Both. And the core insight is that protecting that team culture, especially when growth or pressure or transitions hit, that requires a deliberate plan.
You can't just hope it stays strong.
Now, hope is not a strategy here. You need to build in guardrails, maintain those consistent rhythms we discussed to keep the culture healthy and the team on track. Outro.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. A truly comprehensive deep dive into the blueprint for peak performing teams, moving all the way from those foundational biblical mandates.
Why teams in the first place?
To incredibly practical tools for navigating conflict, fostering real unity, measuring the right things, and even multiplying your impact.
Yeah, we've seen how powerful some of these concepts can be, like the 3 C's filter for bringing people onto the team.
Filling character contribution.
Or the clarity that something like a RECI chart can bring to roles.
Definitely.
Or even just fundamentally rethinking conflict, seeing it not as a problem, but as an invitation for deeper spiritual growth. These shifts can really transform team dynamics and ultimately the outcomes.
Absolutely. So for you listening today, maybe here's a final provocative thought to mull over as we finish up.
Yeah.
If you were to evaluate your own team right now, or maybe a team you're part of, just honestly assess it today. What's one specific area? Maybe it's conflict, maybe communication, maybe it's how you think about calling or bringing people in. Just pick one area.
Just one.
Where could you intentionally apply one of these principles we've talked about? Just try it for the next 90 days and see what happens. See if you can foster deeper unity, maybe see greater fruitfulness.
A 90-day challenge.
Yeah, something concrete to take away. Give it a try.